I want to present to you
What?
the tree moat, and watch this. In life, you can have nice things sometimes.
All right, I have an icebreaker question for you.
Okay.
What was the worst style choice that you ever made?
You feel that you've never made a bad style choice, don't you?
No, I've made bad style choices.
What is the worst fashion choice you have watched me ever make? Even like my hair today.
I feel like you make great fashion choices.
There have been times that you have looked at me and said, "Are you leaving the house like that?" And I was fully intending to leave the house like that.
All right, there are just a few times where Mandy has attempted to leave the house while wearing slippers and more than one non-matching form of off-white. And that's a very surprising choice if people are going to see you. I like your cardi. That's a really nice cardi.
I just asked you this icebreaker question so that I could make myself breakfast.
Like, this
and a
is
coffee.
such an extensive thing that you're doing.
You know the worst part of it?
Tell me.
I can't even eat it or drink it because I'm going to be filming you. The older I get, the less I'm able to hold a coffee cup straight all the time, and it just starts spilling while I'm standing still.
I am just so uncomfortable
There you
with
go.
everything that's happening.
This is going to be some B-roll.
The coffee?
Yeah, aren't you talking about like happiness and stuff?
This is like
What?
Just watching coffee is how you can just watch. Look at those bubbles. You can start now.
Crossroads. Welcome back to another week of Anchor Points. This past Sunday, we were talking about Acts 16:18, a story of where Paul gets thrown in jail, and they end up having a really interesting and I would say unexpected response to that situation. And I think that it's a powerful principle for us that you see in that story, but you see it in other places in scripture too. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and just sort of like we did on Sunday, wrapping up the series, of a heart for worship, a heart of worship. I want to wrap up sort of our anchor points in that vein as we transition into Christmas season. Okay. So as a reminder from this past Sunday, I would say probably your 2 or 3 main points were we were made to worship. And this is one of those that I think if you read scripture, if you read the Bible, you get that sense, but I don't think it always is clear or makes sense what that means or looks like. But the common pushback, and Pastor Dave touched on it, is we weren't made to worship because God needs our worship. We were made to worship because we need to worship. And that's a super significant principle and a super significant understanding in our lives that really, if you centralize that in your life, you'll see a lot of things come more into focus. Living your life in such a way where you don't worship, or that you're not aware that you're worshiping and you don't even choose what you're worshiping. It's almost like looking through a camera with the focus just off. Like you can make things out, but everything sort of gets jumbled up and gets fuzzy and you sort of miss the point of what you're trying to see a lot of times. And so what I want to do, I want to read a scripture to you, and then I want to talk through it, and then I want to read a second one, because I think that these 2 scriptures, along with the one that we went through in Acts on Sunday, they paint a very specific picture that I think is very valuable for us as believers. First, in Romans 12:1 and 2, it says, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship." There's that word, worship. And then it continues, "Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God." I think if you've spent some time in Christianity, you're already familiar with this verse, because this is one that gets shared a lot. It's one of those verses where you have a handful of them throughout the Bible where they really summarize an awful lot of our beliefs, practically, theologically. With this verse, it talks about presenting yourself as a living sacrifice and that being your true worship. And so if the idea is that we live our lives with a heart of worship, that we understand what that looks like, because I think that worship, it is this thing that we do congregationally and together on Sundays where we sing. That's a really significant part of what worship means. but it's bigger than that, I think. And so what we see in this, right after it says to present yourselves as this living sacrifice, and that's what true worship is, it says, don't be conformed to this age. And if you remember on Sunday, we had this incredible example of what that can look like, because Pastor Dave was talking about, the things that were worrying him, and Emily was playing. It was this distraction, and it was this like challenging thing where you're seeing that impossibility that if you're worshiping, you can't worry at the same time. And you see that in the scripture here. You see, don't be conformed to this age. I think if you're living and a person in America, you know that there's nothing that would probably be more conforming to this age than just being controlled and being overwhelmed by worry and anxiety and depression. That is the defining feature of this age right now. We have so much information, we have so much access to everyone in the world that we are dealing with and carrying burdens so much larger than we were designed to carry. And so that promise in the word where God says, cast your cares on me because my burden is easy and my yoke is light, it's never been more relevant than it is today. The last one that I want to look at, it's a verse in Matthew. It's in chapter 16, verses 24 through 26. It's a verse I think we'll be familiar with, but what it does for me is it really creates clarity as to what being a living sacrifice means. Because I think that's maybe a challenging phrase in like modern English to understand. And so it says, then Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, which should be all of our desires, right? The best path to take is the one Jesus is taking, wherever that's going. Jesus says, let that person who desires to come after me deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And then it says, for whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. This is such an extraordinary verse and phrase to me. And I think we get it because we're very familiar with the story of the cross, and we're very familiar with the sacrifice that Jesus made by dying in our place and by being raised from the dead and conquering death and claiming victory. But this phrase was said before that. And so this phrase, take up your cross and follow me, we read it with the understanding that there was a person who took his cross and then came back from that, and that person was Jesus. But in this context, when these people would have heard this phrase, if you were made to pick up a cross in Roman culture, you only did it once. And at the end of it, you died on it. That's what picking up a cross, that's the picture. It's you pick it up and you die on it. And so the idea of being a living sacrifice is that Jesus has taken this symbol of death and this symbol of Roman oppression, which was the cross, and turned it on its head. And he's made it this thing where you now have the ability to pick up that cross and to follow him where he's going because he empowers you to do so. What he does is he allows you the opportunity to sort of go through challenging things, knowing that he has your back, knowing that he has you protected and in his hands, and not necessarily protected from harm or from danger, but protected from a life lived absent of him. And so as we try to work through the idea of how do we worship and not worry, how do we make our lives about worship, and how do we recognize that we need worship? Well, we do it by recognizing that we're living sacrifices for the Lord, and that what that means is that daily we are waking up and we're clear-mindedly determining and deciding that we're going to die to ourself and we're going to live in Jesus. We're going to live doing what he's called us to do. We're going to live being like him. And from there, he has free reign to lead us and guide us and fill us and use us in every way that he can. I would encourage you as we transition, more into the Christmas season. We'll be in December next time the Anchor Points rolls around. I would encourage you, take some time this week, read through these two verses in Romans 12 and Matthew 16, and even go back into Acts 16 that we studied on Sunday, and spend some time looking over your life and saying, what habits do I have? What am I doing that would be taking me out of a spirit of worship? What are things that are worrying me that I'm not giving to the Lord? What are things that are weighing me down and sort of oppressing me either mentally or physically that I'm not giving to the Lord and allowing him to work through? Back in the day when rabbis would walk town to town, their feet would get dusty because you're wearing sandals, you're just walking, right? The idea behind the people who were following these rabbis, these young students who were wanting to become rabbis themselves, there was a saying in that time where they would say, you ought to be covered in the dust of your rabbi because you're following him so closely. That should be us, church. Let's do that. Let's try to follow Jesus so closely that we get a little bit dusty along the way, and let's worship him as we go. Have a great rest of your week. I'm excited to see you on Sunday. Later, Crossroads.